Good morning and welcome to today's Talking Cafe. My name, as I'm sure most of you now know, is Wendy Rudd, Village Agent for South Somerset. Today I'm going to be talking to Joanna Keats from Best Energy Saving Network. That's one of her many hats, and she's going to be covering quite a few subjects. And as usual, I've done my poem to try and let you know what this is all about going forward. Fuel poverty and food insecurity. Looking to the future, what do you see? Is your choice between warmth and food putting you in a really sad mood? No central heating or hot water. Using heaters you shouldn't oughta. Are you now jeopardizing your health, all because of your lack of wealth? Does your home have a musty smell? Is it damp? How can you tell? The CO killer and cutting costs, keeping warm even when frost. Call us and see what is involved in helping you get your problems resolved. Don't dilly-dally, please get in touch. We would like to help you very much. Which brings me nicely to Joe. That sort of encapsulates everything that we're talking about today. But as I said, you do have many hats, so I shall leave you to introduce yourself and what it is you do and what we're doing today.
Thanks, Wendy. Hi, I'm Jo Keats. I'm actually based in Dorset, and I work for an organisation called Dorset Community Action, which is very similar to one of the organisations that you have in Somerset. But for my sins in the wintertime, I focus on fuel poverty, and more lately, because of COVID, about the problems that people are having being able to afford to buy food. I also do a lot of community advice in the county that I live in. We do a Trusted Voices project, which is to do with COVID and getting the right message out there, because there's been a lot of fake news. So it's sort of a bit of myth busting, and that's quite good fun. But today I want to talk to you about fuel poverty, how to help you to pay some of your bills, and also there is this big thing about which do you do? Do you heat or do you eat? So let's start with a nice example. On the first slide, you'll see that. Can you see a first slide?
Not at the moment. Dave is obviously, there we go. Dave is hidden in the background. He's our man helping us, isn't he?
He certainly is, thank goodness. Well, as you can see on that slide, I'm also part of the Best Energy Saving Network, and I cover the Southwest region, which is why you've got me in Somerset today. So if we go on to the next slide and we have a look at Doris. Doris, you can see, has got a blanket over her. She's got a shawl. She's wearing a hat. She's got one of those awful gas heaters with a back boiler on it. But in the winter, she goes to bed really, really early. So literally as soon as it gets dark, because she can't afford to keep the heating on overnight. She also eats much smaller meals, because that's the only way that she can afford to pay for her house to be warm. People found out about it and realised that this wasn't the way that she wanted to live, and she wanted a much more sort of comfortable life. So she was given £200 from the Somerset Surviving Winter Appeal to help with her bills and buy food. And if many of you get your Surviving Winter grant from the government, you're often asked, if you don't need it, to be able to give it to those who do need it. So Doris is very grateful, and she is supposed to be smiling in that picture, but I don't think you can quite see it. So if we go on to the next slide, we talk about fuel poverty, but what does it actually mean? It's the sort of two words that kind of mean something and nothing at all, really. But basically, it's a household can't afford to heat their home and be able to eat and pay their other bills at the same time. If they've got a house that's very cold because it's not been insulated properly, then it will probably have an EPC rating or an energy performance certificate rating of less than C. And if after paying their mortgage and their rent and their council tax, they find themselves below the poverty line, then they're going to be in fuel poverty. And in this figure, in England, this was in 2016, 3.66 million households were on the poverty line. And they reckon now it's going to be way over the 4 million mark, what with COVID and furlough and redundancies. So the next slide. The average energy bill is about £110 a month. So that's your gas and electricity combined. Some households pay more to keep warm, or they might cut back and go cold as a result. And it could be that they might be paying an expensive fuel tariff. They've been with the same company for years and years and years. It could be that they haven't got a very energy efficient home. So lots of buildings in Somerset or any of the rural areas in southwest England are made with solid walls. So you can't put the cavity wall insulation into them, for example, and they're much harder to insulate. The other problem with living in rural areas is there's a good chance that you can't get gas to your home either. And if you've got old appliances, so you might have really old fridges, you might have really old boilers, they might cost a lot to use. And if you've already got yourself into arrears because your fuel bills are so high, then not only are you trying to pay for the bills that you've got now, you're also trying to pay for the arrears that you had. So if you take the £110 a month, if you had arrears of, say, 60, then that's £170 a month you're trying to find. And that's a lot of money. And slide 5. These are signs of fuel poverty in the home. So if you went into somebody's house and you felt you had a coat on because it was out, you'd been outside, and you went into the home and you thought, oh, I don't want to take my coat off, it's really cold in here. That could be a sign that the heating's not being used properly, or that they're cutting back, or perhaps the heating's not working at all. It could be that when you go and see them, they might just be living in one room, and you'll see that they've got a little single point heater. You know, it's one of those little fan heaters or the halogen heaters that you see, might be quite close to the chair that they're sat at. If you look at the walls, there might be mold on them and peeling wallpaper or peeling paint. If you look at the radiators, there might be dust on them or any heating elements that you happen to see. If there's dust, they're not being used. Whereas if they have been used, there won't be any dust on them. Do they have hot water? If they've turned their immersion heater off because it's really expensive to use, and that's probably one of the most expensive things to use in your house, then they won't have any hot water. Can you see, looking at Doris at the beginning, we showed that she had a blanket over her, a shawl and a hat on. Is that what the person that you've come to see is doing as well? Now, these are questions that you're not likely to find out unless you actually talk to the person. So it might be that you find out as you're talking to them that their fuel bill is so high that they're trying desperately to ration or restrict their fuel. It might be that they owe lots of money to an energy supplier, but they don't really know what to do about it. And you may be the first person that they've spoken to about it. And it may be that if they have got gas, that they've self-disconnected. So if they had a prepayment meter, they haven't put any money on that meter. So in effect, they've disconnected themselves. It's more likely to be gas than it is electricity, because you'll find with electricity, that powers your lights. It powers things like a microwave, fridge, chargers for your phone, TV, that sort of thing. And the next slide, please. Damp. Damp, glorious damp. Many years ago, before I went into community advice, I used to work for environmental health in Bournemouth, and I used to inspect private sector homes, so that's privately rented properties. And my business for damp used to start from about October, and it used to run through to about April every year. And these were the things that I would see. The musty smell is the first thing that hits you as soon as you go through the front door. It's a really distinctive smell. And for me, it smells a bit like patchouli. It probably has nothing to do with patchouli at all, but that's what it always reminds me of when I smell it. You might find that there are marks on the walls, sort of water penetration. You might see sort of roundish marks on the walls, or you might see sort of dark areas on walls. So you might see discoloured plaster, lifting or peeling wallpaper. That's very, very common. Same with peeling paint. And if you go into a property and you feel that the internal wall, so that might be a wall between, say, your lounge and your hall, is cold to touch, then that could be that there's a problem with damp inside, because that wall should actually be sort of quite warm and dry to touch. And if you see that there's excessive condensation on the window, and you see that you've got sort of puddles around the window, or you see water streaming down from the inside, that can also be a problem with damp. But it can also be a problem for other things as well. Okay, so we've gone to the next one, which is getting rid of condensation. You need to wipe down the windows and sills every morning. You're more likely to see it being that bad if you've got single glazed windows. But there are other things that cause condensation as well. Dealing with steam from cooking. A really good idea is to put the lids on pans if you're cooking vegetables or anything. One, it cooks them slightly quicker. Two, it keeps the steam in. And so that actually reduces your condensation. If you have a shower or a bath, have your windows open very, very slightly, or have your extractor fan on, but keep the bathroom door shut. And when you've finished having your shower or bath, keep it like that. So leave the bathroom, keep the extractor fan on, keep the windows slightly open so that all that condensation can go. Ventilation is something that also needs to be thought about, because sometimes, I don't know if you've sort of wandered around the house, every so often you might, when you're doing a bit of cleaning, you might move a wardrobe away from the wall, or you might move a chest of drawers away from the wall. And sometimes it can look a bit musty behind. And that's because the air there hasn't really had the chance to move, because no one goes there and no one moves that chest of drawers very often. And it's the same if you've got every single window and gap plugged up in your house, then you haven't got that ventilation, and your air does need to move around the house. Otherwise, you do end up with damp problems. Keep your house warm. If it's not warm enough, or it's too warm, then you can end up with condensation problems. Insulation does make a difference, because it's cheaper to heat your home. If it's really bad, buy a dehumidifier. If you're in a privately rented property and you're having to have a dehumidifier, then your landlord needs to be involved. And this one, don't hang clothes to dry inside. This used to be my bugbear in the winter. University students, I have to say, have to be the worst for this. They will hang clothes to dry on every surface that you can possibly think of. And they don't just do one single layer on things like radiators, they pile them on. They expect them to dry, and they don't consider the fact that the moisture's got to go somewhere. And then they complain that it's cold. The reason it's cold is because they've got tons of clothes on the radiator. And unfortunately, an awful lot of students from university, the one thing they'll get is, well, it's not like this at my parents' house. Well, of course it's not, because the parents are looking after their house properly. But the students aren't. The students don't want to go to the laundrette, you see, to be able to pay that little bit extra, because that money that they go to the laundrette with, they used to be able to buy 2 or 3 pints with that. Sorry, I didn't say that. It's really bad, isn't it? But having seen it loads and loads of times, it did used to annoy me a little bit. Let's go on to the next slide. I'm going to get messages of complaint now, aren't I, saying that I've been horrible to all the students. Not all students are bad, just, but it was quite a big thing. Then we've got the silent killer. Now, this is a really, really scary one. It's not something that you hear about too often, but it can happen, and it can happen to anybody that has anything that is gas, colour gas, paraffin heaters, charcoal, peat, not that we see too much of that down this way, coal, wood, so if you've got a wood burning stove, petrol, oil, LPG, any of these things can cause carbon monoxide if they're not being used properly in the home. There are some of these appliances that are actually banned from being used in the home now, things like gas heaters. You wouldn't see in, say, a privately rented property, but there are plenty of home occupiers that are still using them. If you haven't got proper ventilation, these really can cause a problem. And the problem with carbon monoxide is that it doesn't smell, you can't see it, but it can kill you. And even small amounts can poison you and making you feel really, really ill. So if you have got a gas cooker, I don't know if you remember the old British Gas advert. It used to be cookability, and you used to see beautiful, bright blue flame. Well, even when you've got your gas cooker on very, very low, it should still be a really good blue flame. So if it's looking lazy and it's sort of got a yellowy, orangey colour, think to yourself, oh, that's not quite right there. Soot and yellow and brown staining around appliances also should tell you that something's not quite right. If your pilot light keeps blowing out, so that might also be happening not only on your cooker, but you might also find in your boiler that it keeps blowing out. Do you remember I said to you there are other reasons why you can have lots of condensation around the windows and walls? This is because carbon monoxide can do that too. And you must get your chimneys swept, because if your chimneys are blocked a little bit, then the carbon monoxide comes back down through the chimney, down back into your living room. And then we go on to the next one, which will tell you. Next slide. So what are the main symptoms? If you get headaches, breathlessness, and nausea, they're probably the sort of big three main ones. And then you leave your home, you go outside, you go to the shops, and you start to feel a lot better. Think about why that's happening. Are those symptoms coming back on again when you get home? Because if they are, it may be because you've got carbon monoxide. If you've only got electricity in your home, this isn't something that's going to happen in your home. It's only for those people that have got other forms of fuel. These days, it's a really good idea to have a carbon monoxide detector, which will beep if you have got it in the home. Obviously, if you've lost consciousness or you've collapsed, then you're going to be more poisoned. But these symptoms are also symptoms of other things as well. So you've really got to listen to your friends and family when they say that they feel ill. But if those 6 in any order sort of come and you know that they're using solid fuel or gas or anything like that, just have it in the back of your mind that it could be something that they need to think about. It's a really good idea to get gas appliances checked annually. And again, it's owner-occupiers that don't tend to do this as regularly. If you're living in privately rented properties, by law, you have to have them done once a year. Get an audible carbon monoxide heater done. And just think carbon monoxide when you visit people if they're talking about those symptoms. And then what's out here on the next slide? What can we do to help you? There are lots of things actually that we can help when it comes to people that are really struggling to pay their fuel bills. Income maximisation. So it might be that you've been on the same benefits for donkey's years and you haven't realised that because you've had a change in circumstances that you might be entitled to a bit more. So if you go to Citizens Advice or Housing Debt Advisors, they'll be able to have a look through all the welfare benefits that you're on and see if there's anything they can do to maximise it. Citizens Advice will also help with fuel debt problems and see if they can come to an arrangement with the fuel company that you're with. Often it's worth thinking about switching tariff. Unfortunately, loyalty doesn't pay these days. So if you've been with a company for many, many years, they won't reward you for that. They'll just stick you on a higher tariff. It might be that when you're looking at changing the way that you pay your bill, for example, you get about 5% off if you use direct debits and you pay for both gas and electricity with one bill. And I do appreciate that if you're in a rural area and you haven't got gas, that's something that you can't do. There's lots of advice out there about energy efficiency, and I've got links that we can go to later on. The warm home discount is something that you should be getting if you're over a certain age, and it's from energy companies. But people that can't get that are people that live in park homes, because their site owner is the one that gets the energy first. But there are organisations that you can go to apply for that 140, and it comes as a grant. If you were born before the 5th of October 1954, then you'll get between £100 and £300 a year from the government, and that should be automatic. £100 is if you were born just after sort of round about the sort of the 1950s. But when you get to over the age of sort of 80, 85, they then bump it up to 300. And it's also a really good idea to go on the Priority Services Register. And this you can get for the electricity and gas networks, as well as your electricity and gas providers and the water companies. And this is if you have a power cut or they have to cut the water off, they'll make sure that you are okay because you're on that register. And then if we go on to the next one. Right, there's some links here, which this is very small, but Dave has said kindly that he will put these links up for you in a bit so that you can actually see them. So there's South West Water, which gives reduced tariffs for people on very low incomes. Green Home grants for insulation and low carbon heating in England. That's one of those grants that you have to give a certain amount of money to yourself as well. You've got your Citizens Advice Somerset, and that's a project where they offer energy advice, and that's in South Somerset. Then you've got CSE, who are based in Bristol, but they give energy advice to Bristol, South Gloucestershire and Somerset, and that includes the unitary authorities for North Somerset and Bath and North East Somerset. They also, CSE also have emergency prepayment meter vouchers available as well for those people that are on prepayment meters and just haven't got any money to be able to put in the meter that week. And then you've got the Energy at Home project for Bath and North Somerset, which again can help with insulation and other energy advice. And the next one is to do with Somerset Council Emergency Help. I popped this one up because we are still going through the coronavirus situation, and looks like we probably will for a few months yet. So Somerset offer this support helpline, and it's for all of Somerset, and they put you through to the various districts as and when you need it. And they help you with things like personal care and support. So that includes food and delivery of prescriptions if you're not able to get out. They also help with support for the homeless. Emotional support if you're feeling worried or anxious. So many people are by themselves, or they're just not able to make the contact with their family that they would like to be able to. And anxiety about catching the virus as well. And sort of general sort of well-being has been affected because we're in this now. We're almost up to a year. So if you need to talk to someone, give that number a ring. It might be that you need transport to medical appointments. You might not be able to use public transport, for example, because it doesn't run through your village. But again, they'll help you with that. So please, 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 if you do have any medical appointments, give them a ring, because it's so important that you carry on looking after yourself and that you don't miss any appointments with consultants or anything like that. Waste collection and disposal. They should be doing that anyway. And the financial support, well, that is likely that they will put you through to the different numbers that I've already mentioned sort of further back in this presentation.
And they'll probably also include your village agents in that as well. We pick up quite a few of the referrals for that as well. So
And I should imagine that you're also some of the volunteers that drive people to hospital and the doctors and things like that as well, aren't you?
That's where I think we come into our own with local knowledge, because we are able to, we have the resource of knowing who is available. So yes, it's all part and parcel of what we do.
That's brilliant. I think your agents are absolutely incredible, and I love the fact that you've got so many different ones sort of dotted around the county and for different reasons as well. It's a really, really good system.
I'm not going to argue with you.
Should be very proud. Okay, so can we go on to that's the emergency help for fuel poverty, but a lot of this stuff is also related to food insecurity as well. Now, food insecurity is again, it's a something and nothing expression, because it doesn't really mean anything to many people, but basically it's, can you afford to buy any food this week? Or if you just had to fork out to sort of try and keep your house warm? Or have you decided, well, I might be able to get a little bit of food, but I won't put the heating on this week? I am so sorry. Please go away. I'll come back to you later. Sorry about that.
Sounds much louder to you than it did to us. You're all right, Joe.
Well, fortunately, my phone thing does actually tell me who the person was, so I will be able to go back to them later on. So, food insecurity. Basically, it's, can you afford to eat decent food? Or can you actually get to the places that do sell good food? Is the food that you're buying nutritionally adequate? And are your foods safe? So you're not eating stuff that's out of date, for example. So it's about the quality of food as well as quantity. And it's not just about hunger, it's about being appropriately nourished to attain and maintain good health. And in many counties, unfortunately, food poverty is very well hidden. Now you can see this took me ages to make this slide, absolutely ages. But you've got the financial side of things. So all the cogs fit into the, sort of the wheel. Financial. Can you afford to buy the food? Has your income gone down because of COVID, for example? Has food gone up? Well, unfortunately it has. And if you take, for example, you might have got Tesco's, Lidl's, Aldi's, or any of the other sort of budget supermarkets that are around. You may now have to go to your more local grocers, and the food quality will be good, but it probably costs slightly more. So there is that to consider. And there's also, well, what do I spend my money on this week? What's more important? Do I put £10 of petrol in the car, or do I leave the car at home and buy food? And many people do have to think like that. They really do have to prioritize. Then you've got the social side of it. Well, if you enjoy cooking and you can afford to have a decent meal when you can have friends round, you might have a bottle of wine and that sort of thing, then you wouldn't even consider what it's like not to know where your next meal is going to come from. But if you don't know where your next meal is going to come from, you're probably going to be quite socially isolated, because you're not going to want to invite people around because you haven't got anything to be able to give them. Your networks are likely to be not as good, again, because you may have self-isolated, or you may have just isolated yourself because you're in a situation where you're embarrassed to be part of that network because you can't afford to eat or heat properly. Then there are cultural norms. So there are many generations that have eaten badly. They may sort of survive on the beige diet, which is pastries, chips, sugary foods, and they haven't really sort of got to grips yet with actually what's good food and is healthy food. So the dietary choices may be a bit beige. And then the availability. Can you get to the places where you've got this sorts of food? Have you got the access to them? It may be that you're quite reliant on food banks, which case you're given the plastic bags with food in, but you don't really have much choice about what's in them. And level of education also helps as well. You might never have actually learned how to cook. So a lot of these workshops now that are doing sort of one-pot food meals are really, really good to know about. Have I got another nice picture? Ah, yes, the next one. Okay, so mild food insecurity. This is worrying about the ability to obtain food. Can I get it? Can I afford to buy it? Can I afford to get to where I need to go to buy it? Moderate is when you're compromising the quality and variety of food because you've not got very much. So you might be thinking of calorie high foods. So things like pastries, pies, that type of thing, as opposed to, say, something that is more green and sort of, the rainbow colours of veg and things. It may be that you want your children to eat and you want them to have a healthy meal, but you haven't got enough to be able to feed all of you. So you're making an excuse as to why you're not eating with them. So you're skipping meals. And severe food insecurity is basically where you're experiencing hunger because you might not have eaten for 2 or 3 days. The most frightening thing about this, before we go on to the next slide, is that between 2015 and 2017, 2.2 million people were severely food insecure. We are actually ranked 4 in Europe because of this. Bulgaria, Romania, and Lithuania are in the top 3. And you wouldn't think that a country like the UK that says it's sort of one of the most forward in the Western world would be in this situation. In June 2017, UNICEF found that in the UK, approximately 19% of children under the age of 15 live with an adult who is moderately or severely food insecure. So basically, again, 20% of families, if you've got a child under the age of 15, there's a good chance that mum and dad aren't eating properly because they're trying to make sure that the kids are eating. And then on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So what happens when you're not eating the right stuff? Well, if you've got inadequate infant and child feeding, you can end up with insufficient intake of calories. You're not getting the right amount of protein, vitamins, and minerals. This can actually end up with things like stunted growth. Now, that's something you didn't hear about much after sort of the Second World War. It was sort of thing you'd heard in sort of Victorian Britain about stunted growth. And children wasting away. Again, you heard about it in Victorian Britain. You would not expect to hear about it now. And the other problem is that where people are eating calorie-dense food, which is saturated fats, sugar, salt, that sort of thing, it's not expensive, it's high calorie, but it's low nutrition. So then you end up with metabolic adaptation to food deprivation, and that's when you can end up with obesity or being overweight. And again, you can end up with different things like even things like vitamin C deprivation that leads to scurvy. There have been more cases of that more recently, which again is something you wouldn't expect to see these days. And the next one. So what's available? Well, food banks, and my goodness, you've got a fair few around your county and sort of on the borders of. Food banks are great because they're there for emergency food. You know that if you've got no money, you can go and get referred to a food bank and they give emergency food. The problem with that is that you don't actually have any choice in the food that you're given. And you might feel really embarrassed about going there because food banks have always been considered the place that you go to when you haven't got anything. Then we've got the community fridges. They're popping up all over the place now. They repurpose food. So that's any food from fair share, different supermarkets. It may be that people have grown too many beetroot or lettuce or something on their allotment, so they'll put it in the community fridge. So you end up with a slightly different food choice, and anybody can access it. Doesn't matter how much money you've got. So you end up with more food choice, less food waste, and you're not stigmatized by it, and they're quite easy to set up as well. And a social pantry, so this is social supermarket, social pantry, people call them all different things, but basically you pay about £5 a year to join, and you then can access lots and lots of healthy foods. They do it on a scheme where you pay, and it varies from one to one, so I'm just giving this as a vague example. You pay a £5 and you get about 15 items. Some are in a sort of high category, so you get expensive categories, so you get slightly less of them. And then there's a middle and a sort of low cost category, so you would get more items depending on what you want to buy. But you have got that choice. So that, again, you've got less food waste, a lot more food choice. Again, anybody can go to it. So there isn't the stigma attached to it. They're a bit more complex to set up because you've got the sort of membership thing and working out the different food items, but they are becoming very, very popular. Now, this slide is, I'm afraid this is your fault, Somerset, because you've got so many of these areas of help that my print had to get smaller and smaller and smaller. So Somerset, you've got food pantries at, I'm just going to rattle this list off. The links will be put up afterwards, but listen to this list. Somerville, Boundbrook, North Plainfield. There's a warehouse in Bridgewater that distributes food. Food banks at Taunton, Wellington, Wiveliscombe, Bridgewater, Minehead. Then you've got just across the border, Watchet, Lantwit, St Athan. There are 4 in Barry. You've got them in Minehead, Cheddar Valley, Wells, Chard, Yeovil, Taunton, Bridgewater, Wellington, Langport, Glastonbury, Highbridge, Burnham-on-Sea, Nailsea, Clevedon, Portishead, Weston-super-Mare, Weston, Thornbury, Yates, Chipping Sodbury, Keynsham, 2 in Bath, 3 at Summer Valley, 1 at Twerton. In Bristol, you've got them at Kingswood, Fish Ponds, and BS5 St Mark's. Then you've got the school vouchers for clothes and shoes and school uniforms. So there's a lot of stuff out there that you can access. And it's really good to know these different places so that if you do talk to somebody that needs a bit of help, you can say, oh, well, there's a food bank down the road for you, or have you spoken to these people? So the level of help in your county is absolutely incredible. And I think it's absolutely amazing that you've got the potential to work with your communities to increase the food security, and you can build this community and you can reduce food waste. I think it's absolutely incredible. An ideal situation will be when we end up with more of a seed to plate in your community. So allotments, so many people end up with a glut of different vegetables and fruit. So it's a great way to share around in your different communities. There are lots of cookery workshops and projects out there for those people that don't feel particularly confident about how to cook something. Community lunch clubs. I love community lunch clubs, and I probably miss those more than anything else because I used to go out to them all the time in the winter, and I used to meet such amazing people and hear about their life experiences, as well as giving them the opportunity to make sure that they were okay financially. Support your local shops. The more you support your local shops, the more that they'll be able to offer you. You've got community fridges, larders, social pantries, different names, but they all help. And you've got the food banks. So if you join all of these together, you can improve your food security, you can improve health and well-being, you can decrease isolation as well, because think about your lunch clubs and workshops, you're making new friends. You learn new skills, you make new friends, you live life to the full. So grow life, live life, and love life. Thank you.
No, thank you. That was absolutely packed with information. There's no excuse now not to know where to go to contact, because it's all there in black and white. So let's, fingers crossed, we can get this out there and everybody viewing this and looking at the information. I was, as I say, I took some notes because I was quite astounded at some of the things you were coming out with myself. Especially when you said about England being fourth, you know, on the, you know, I was thinking, what? As you rightly say, we think of ourselves as being up there with, you know, the biggies, you know, countries that are so much larger than ourselves. And then to hear that, and then comparing to Victorian times, to think that's how things have, you know, gone.
And the other problem as well is the fact that because we've had COVID over the last year, so many people have been furloughed, so they've lost 20% of their income. Sometimes it's gone up to 30%. Lots of people have been made redundant. Lots of people have had to take lower paid jobs if they've been in a situation where, you know, they've lost a really good job. And they might have, most people tend to live within their means. So if you're on, say, 30,000 a year and your bills fitted in nicely to that 30,000 a year, and suddenly you drop down to, say, 22,000, well, where are you going to find that other 8,000 to pay your bills? And this is going to be something that we're going to be living with for longer than us being able to go outside and meet our friends. This is going to be going on for a good couple of years, at least, I reckon.
And then along with that, you have all of the well-being issues that happen with the isolation. So it's not just a one problem looking for a solution. When you put the whole lot together, it, as you say, the knock-on effect is really quite tremendous, isn't it?
It is. And the isolation, when you think about, if you take a family, for example, and they're having difficulties thinking about what they're going to eat that night, it may be that they've decided that they're all going to sort of stay in the lounge because that's the warmest room. But then two of them have got to do their homework. They're studying for their GCSEs, for example, or they've got a test the next day. They're not going to be able to study as well as perhaps they should have been able to because of the noise around them and everyone talking. And they've actually noticed that children that are studying in colder environments, or they're eating far less, then they don't remember things as well. They're not taking in the information as well as they would do. And there's still also a lot of children out there that haven't actually got the right equipment to be able to be homeschooled as well.
Yeah, it's funny because I did watch a program where they actually did the tests on. They actually did a clinical, put it in there, and they kept reducing the temperature with the same test to see what the impact was. And as you say, it was actually scientifically proven to the colder, the more it impacts on the brain and the thought.
Yeah. And the other thing you've got as well with older people is the colder the home, the more sluggish they get, and the more likely they are to have slips, trips, and falls.
Yes, yes. So you've actually given everybody an awful lot of food for thought today. It's funny because talking to my sister, she happened to comment on her CO2, her CO monitor going. They've got an integral door from garage to house. They had a car on the drive, and this is what was so funny, but they'd gone through the garage, opened the door, gone in to pick up something, gone back through, closed the door, and the alarms were that good that it tripped.
Wow.
And they couldn't work out why. They thought, oh, is it faulty? Because it had done it a couple of times. But this particular time, as my sister was coming through, she could smell the exhaust fumes.
Mm-hmm.
So she said, make sure you shut the garage door. So, yes, as you say, the advice on the CO monitors, definitely. And if you are worried that you can't afford them and you think you may need them, then get hold of your village agents to get you a home fire safety check, because whatever's needed, the fire service are really, really helpful and will install them for you. So that's another good plug at the end there to ensure that people are making themselves safe.
And they also do the smoke detectors as well, don't they? And they
do.
And I love the fact as well that they go around your house with you and show you the different ways of getting out of your house as quickly as possible.
Yeah, as you say, when you've witnessed, you've had, one of the visits and you've gone round, with them. Because you hear that they do, yes, they do smoke alarms, yes, they do this. But when you look at what they actually do and the advice they give and the support they give, it's actually really remarkable.
It's amazing, actually. I don't think it happens quite so much these days because many people have got double glazed doors. But for the older doors where you'd have a key in the lock and you might think, oh, I'll take the key out of the lock after I've locked it so that nobody can try and push it from the other side. But then, of course, if you've got a house that's full of smoke, trying to find that key as you're trying to be the difference between what the fire service point out to you, things that you don't consider in normal everyday life.
No, that's right. That's right. And I suppose looking at the time, we'd done really, really well. So I'm going to say, are there any questions? I don't think with today being half term, we're going to get questions now. But just to remind everybody that if you've watched this at a later date, you can still post your questions for Jo. If you don't go direct to Jo, pop them up here if it's easier. It will be monitored and we will make sure that Jo gets any questions and queries. Say thank you very, very much for a very informative talking cafe. And of course, the next time you get something happening in Somerset, you will call me and say, when can I come on Facebook? So again, thank you very, very much.
Thanks, Wendy.
Okay, and we will hopefully see you in the not too distant future. That just leaves me to say goodbye and thank you for watching. Next week, we will have my colleague, Russell Pearce, and he's going to be talking to you about Home First. So until then, keep safe, brace yourself for a very wet weekend, and I look forward to seeing you in a few weeks' time. Bye-bye.